Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, it's good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine, thank
Good,
you.
good.
Doing well.
Yeah.
And today, guess what? We need to talk about coronavirus.
Yes.
I mean, we tried to take a day off, but there's always something there. It looks like it's going to be here a while, even though there's no epidemic anymore, as if there was really a bad epidemic. Yeah. But the information keeps flowing in, the positive information that things aren't quite as bad as they would want us to believe. And we find international, I found a neat article today about what a group in Germany. So it's worldwide. I keep thinking that it's only a few in the United States complaining, but there are groups. But guess what the complaint is? Being censored. Whether you're in Germany or United States or wherever, it's hard to get information out. Even Robert Kennedy's a little bit annoyed by this because he has been on the receiving end of censorship by Facebook and other things. So he's actually filing suit, which I'm going to check into a little more thoroughly. But he's frustrated. But he's like so many of people right now. But there's some good news, but nobody wants to hear it. Maybe it's being censored, and that is. The epidemic never caused a hospital crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, it was scare tactics, millions of people, and actually they used those terms even for the number of people that were going to die. But the hospitals, don't report any serious illnesses, and deaths are down low. But the one thing is, it just seems like the enemy of freedom of choice buckled down. They become more aggressive, and they have to intimidate even more so to get people to go along with this. And that to me is very dangerous because that's sort of like they've invaded people's minds and hearts and soul. That they can't do it. And part of this is this whole idea of you can't be challenged by your neighbors and your friends, and there's so much of that there's so much intimidation that people say, I agree with you, Ron, but it's not worth the effort, because just going to the store, if they want masks on and you don't do it, and you might be able to, and some I really admire the ones, I just try to stay away, but I admire the individuals that go and say, and ask questions. Yeah. What law is this? Where does the authority come from? And are there ever any exemptions and all this? But that's not done enough. Hopefully someday, that people will wake up. But this beginning of the school year is really sad. Sometimes they're going along with the flow, and there's been no evidence of a problem in their particular area. Too bad we don't have enough people trying to mimic what's happening in South Dakota.
Yeah, that's true. And as we'll see later in the chart that I have, this whole idea of closing down the schools, and I think it was in South Carolina, several schools now, they tested a few kids and they were positive and they shut the whole school down. Well, young people don't die from this. I mean, there are very, very few exceptions, and that is simply a fact. But they're still shutting down the schools and ruining these kids' lives. But one of the things we wanted to talk about, our main topic, and you sort of introduced it now, is a piece that we both read by Daniel Horowitz, who's done some really good work in the Conservative Review, just pulling out statistics and saying why the lockdowns, why are they doing it? Well, his latest article is coronavirus hospitalizations down to the lowest levels of the pandemic. So where is our exit strategy? And he makes some really important points in here. First of all, that as you say, the hospitals never went, with very few exceptions. Even in Houston, they never even went beyond their early second tier of ICU beds. A couple of points that he makes. On August 13th, the CDC surveillance program found that coronavirus-like illnesses made up just 1.8% of emergency room visits. In July, they were 4.3%. So essentially disappearing throughout the country are hospitalizations. Deaths, of course, are way down. And what Daniel points out, and a lot of others that we read on Twitter that are following this very closely, the numbers, objectively following the numbers, is that this virus seems to start petering out when it reaches 20% saturation of society. And I'm not a scientist, but the speculation is that there's a natural T-cell immunity that many people in society have, and it hits that brick wall at that point, and that's what we've seen in the Sun Belt, where it's just taken a dive. It continues to dive. Hospitalizations continue to dive, and the case-demic, which we've talked about last week here, is primarily, especially in Texas, has to do with how they're rigging the books, cooking the books, and just plain incompetent in how they're counting cases from April and adding them into our current role to make it look like it's worse than it is.
And their strategy is fear. We've talked about that. As long as people are fearful, they're going to be cautious. And that's where the real danger has been. So many individuals just wouldn't go see a doctor, wouldn't go to the hospital, and the deaths from that is said to be, greater than it has been from the virus because people are scared to death to go. But the campaign of fear has been very successful, and to me, it's still very bewildering how it can be so orchestrated, so well organized. I just don't believe that this is just a usual thing. But now evidence is coming out that we've had viruses. Even influenza, you can find statistics some years where more people die and more problems occur, and yet the reaction and the lockdown, like you mentioned, there's some places where nothing really has gone wrong, but they still go along with lockdown. And it's the fear and the intimidation. It's the idea that you're unpatriotic if you don't go along with this. So that's the problem that we have. And of course, I believe, and that's why we do this very frequently, is try to reassure people and explain the facts and not belittle it. There's a lot of dangers in the world. It might be that, if everybody went back to college on September 1st around the country, and you say, well, it's coronavirus, they can't do that. But what if they did it and nobody died? How many deaths would there be from other things that would happen? Automobiles and whatever. It's not like it's a static world. But right now, I am absolutely convinced that the lockdown was a much greater threat to all of us than was the virus. And the threat is not only, health-wise, but also liberty-wise, because that to me is the one that when I see what's going on and I see these pictures and then this is combined with a so-called justification for the demonstrations in the streets, which are, they're getting more violent all the time. And that is all based on loss of liberty. And then when property and everything is being destroyed, it just blows my mind to think that, the authorities who are in charge say, oh, okay, we're not going to enforce the law.
Yeah.
We'll just let it go. It's a good time to defund the police and this sort of thing. So it's their side has been unbelievably successful, but we keep reporting, and I'll talk about a little bit later on, of an example of people, making inroads, more people joining us. And the big thing is, I think the people are with us, but the distribution of the information by the organized media, by the government, and these organizations like WHO and different things, they're the ones who control the story, and that's where most people are hearing it, and they're not getting our message. But that doesn't mean that we should give up. That means we should work harder and get more people to join us and be more vocal.
Yeah, and the big point about the lockdowns, you said a little bit a few minutes ago, the big thing about the lockdowns is they have not, and you can look at this objectively true at any curve in any of the states, in any of the countries, the lockdowns did not change the trajectory of the virus through society. It didn't do anything if you look at what happened in New York, and then later, because we're further south, what happened in the Sun Belt states. It follows the same trajectory no matter what you do. All they did is harm the population, and they harmed it severely. They harmed the economy. All the data coming out shows that when the serology antibodies testing shows 15% and then start increasing beyond that, the cases start disappearing. And it's happened in Arizona now. That's why you don't hear, remember all the scare stories about Arizona. No one wants to talk about it now because it's not happening. And the other scare thing they said early on, remember, and I think it was Fauci and all of these guys, it'll never happen because we have to reach 70% infection to have herd immunity, and by that time, millions will die. Well, now even the chief fearmongers out there are starting to hedge their bets. And let's look at this first clip, because this says a lot. This is the New York Times, big fear-mongering publication. This came out yesterday, I believe. What if herd immunity is closer than scientists thought? Well, a lot of scientists said at the time that it was what it's now proving to be. It was just the scientists that New York Times was listening to that were saying 70% because they wanted to terrify everyone. But you go through and you read this article and it says, oh my gosh, maybe it's not 70, maybe it's 50, maybe it's even lower, and then oh, sorry, we were wrong, no big deal, the country's ruined.
Yeah. That's the usual way they handle that. I want to mention an article that I read that came from Lou Rockwell's site, and it has a story about what's going on in Germany, which encouraged me that others are getting organized and speaking out in spite of all the censorship. But the title of the article is, "We have a lot of evidence that it's a fake story all over the world," and that's put in quotes. And this is done by an organization called the Corona Extra Parliamentary Inquiry Committee. Long title, but they have over 500 MDs and researchers who have put together, taken a position very similar to ours. And there's over 500 of them, and their big message was, it's never been as serious as they have claimed, and they try to soften it, with an intelligent argument, which they can if anybody would read it and listen to it, because they quoted one person I wanted to repeat, and this is they're quoting John Ioannidis, a professor of epidemiology in Stanford. We've talked about him. He's the one that gave the statistic, and the Germans are looking at that and quoting it, so this is good. He said that the fatality rate for people under 45, almost zero.
Almost zero.
Almost zero. And yes, where is the hysteria? Where are the people who are enforcing the non-laws against kids going out and playing? It's really frustrating to me to see a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old kid being pestered with these masks and then denied going to school. And the more I look at it and the more people I talk to, the more concern I have for the mental status of kids. Sometimes we just assume kids are kids and they're going to have fun anyway, and a bunch of them can. But there's some who react differently, and that to me is very dangerous, because they're not going to recover in a day, because they've been told, they've watched television and they see this stuff that is very, very dangerous, and they've been indoctrinated that you can die from this stuff. You can die from a lot of things, but they get really fearful of this, and everybody's wearing a mask. That's why I detest this mask. If I thought it would save lives, I think it makes things so much worse. And yet, but the kids would look at this and saying, "This is a big deal. Everybody wearing a mask."
Scary,
And so it's, but it's good that this article appeared in a German group, in a German paper. So and their complaints are exactly like ours, but their problem also is getting that message out. So let's hope that more people join in spreading the message and just relax a bit. The world isn't coming to an end if we don't, but it will if we let them continue with their scenario.
Well, Americans need to follow the Germans and now even the South Koreans. I think it was yesterday, I was looking at some video of their protests. Hundreds of thousands of South Koreans in the street saying, end these lockdowns, end the mask mandates, stop it. Because they're not dying. It's a case demic, a lot of cases because they're doing a lot of testing. But I'm going to go through a couple of charts just to sort of back up what Dan Horowitz is writing about the hospitalization in the end. Let's look at this first one. This is Texas Hospital. And if you look at the trajectory here, this is the trajectory of the disease. You see mid-July it peaked. It peaked later here than New York because we're further south. And you see now how it's decreased. Let's look at the next one. This is Dallas. Same scenario. You see the peak and then you see the decline. This is confirmed cases by date of test collection. This is important because this is the real numbers on that day that they found, rather than reporting it months months later. Let's go to the next one really quick. And this is the point you were making. I want to get to this because this is the case fatality rate by age. And you'll find this everywhere. You look at those under age 55 and virtually none. If you look at the ones under 35, literally no one died. Tiny, tiny blips. April, May, June, and July. And in each place, of course, they're already tapering off. So this is what's happening. You could have protected those people on the right and let the people on the left go to school and go to work, keep the economy alive. One more before I turn it back over to you, Dr. Paul, because I know you'll appreciate this one, this next clip, because I think it's very important. It's a little tough to read, but essentially what this is the deaths per 100,000 in the U.S. I think this is from the New York Times, if I'm not wrong. But if you look at the highest death rates in the country, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, these are the states that locked down the tightest with the most restrictions. So, and they did it early on. They did it in early March, way before they had their peak. And so if locking down and masking up and staying home was successful, why are these the highest death rates in the country?
You know, this sort of fits my continuous argument that freedom can solve a lot of problems. It's liberty that we have to be talking about. So the states that denied more liberty than anybody else are the ones that ended up with more deaths. So it isn't just a discomfort and an inconvenience or an illness. It's literally lives are put at stake when the government takes over at the sacrifice of liberty. If you would have, if we all would have, looked at this strictly from a personal liberty responsibility, there would not be lockdowns. There would be a lot of voluntary quarantines, but we've never made it universal to quarantine healthy people. Yeah. And oh yeah, if you're sick, we'll ask the governor of New York, send them to the nursing home. That's a good place. And then they turn around and they take no responsibility for it. So we talk about this all the time, about the states that were the worst and the countries that were the worst were the ones that had the most, forced lockdown. And when somebody does an exceptionally good job, you can't even get it in the media and let people know what's going on. There was another note that I want to just mention that the Chinese, I think it was implied that the Chinese was a little bit annoyed that the Russians were getting the upper hand, getting Sputnik out there too fast. And so they had to get their deal in on a virus, on a vaccine. So the headline here is, this is speculation, of course. I have no idea what they were thinking. But it says, Chinese regulator says COVID-19 vaccines must be, this is important because this is scientific. The vaccines must be at least 50% effective. But those that are affected, they have to protect them for at least 6 months. Isn't this amazing? Half the people don't get protection. The half that do, you don't know how many, but what happens in the 7th month or what happens in the 6th month if they get some other virus and they're close to this? I think you could confuse the body what's going on because you're giving them something that's distracting from natural immunity. So why shouldn't we be talking about natural immunity rather than this nonsense? But this whole idea, and if people, Daniel, I don't even believe that if the virus that comes out soon for us, they're going to say, well, we think it's 50, maybe could be 60%. I think the lines would still be there. I mean, they're just, so intimidated and frightened by this. And besides, there will be a pragmatic argument. Well, I can't get a job unless I've been immune.
That's the thing.
That sort of reminds me of, a communist vicious system. It's been said, and I believe this, that once the communist system was well established in Russia, they didn't have to do it with a lot of guns. The violence was over, and they had two things that they did. If you didn't do right or you spoke out, you were punished by taking your job away from you and also taking your food stamps from you. And people will become obedient. And when I look at some of this stuff, that's the type of authoritarianism because you can't go places now. I mean, nobody says in the front of my house and say you can't leave. but at the same time, all these rules and regulations has, limited my activity and my willingness to go out because of just the nonsense that's going on. So let's hope that and pray, I guess, that the message of dealing with this whole coronavirus scandal, let's just hope that we get more circulation of this and more converts and more people willing to ask questions, because it's unbelievable. But this wasn't done by a military takeover. Yeah. This wasn't done by the Congress writing a law. It wasn't done by anything. It was done by suggestions, but where was the penalty? It was public disgrace.
Yeah.
And people fell in line. They couldn't do it, because if you're in a room and there's 10 people there and one person doesn't have a mask on, believe me, there's a discrimination there and a lot of pressure, and we need more people standing up for what is right and look for a freedom answer to this, and not believe that governments can solve all these. Another example: let the government take care of it, and they make it worse, and they certainly have done it in this case.
They certainly have. You talked about the vaccine. It reminds me of, remember when Fauci was before Congress, I think, and they asked him, what's the quickest you come up with a vaccine? I think he said a year and a half or something. And he said, yeah, but that didn't work out too well, because by the time he got it, the virus had already burned out. Remember that? That seems like that's what's happening now. But I wanted to do a couple of quick things, because this first thing, and it's a graphic, and I think it helps explain it, but this is a recent study from the Annals of Internal Medicine. They traced 3,400 close contacts of 390 cases to find the secondary infections, because this is the big thing. You've got to wear a mask even if you don't have any symptoms, because you could infect people. And if you look at this chart, you can see something very fascinating. 260 people with severe symptoms infected 16. 1,469 with moderate symptoms infected 82. 576 with mild symptoms infected 19. 305 who are asymptomatic infected one single person. So the idea that you've got to wear a mask even if you're not sick because you're going to infect people, the facts are saying otherwise. And by the way, on the topic of masks, let's look at this next one here. This is gross, Dr. Paul. Your mask may be causing candida growth in your mouth. Red bumps around your mouth and cracks at the corners of your lips may mean you have a fungal infection. But of course, they have to add, but that doesn't mean you should stop wearing your mask. No, thank you. And I was in H-E-B yesterday, our local grocery store, getting some food, and I noticed the lady was rustling with her papers or something, her purse, and a lady came by in her cart, and she pointed down, oh, you dropped something, and I just kind of casually looked over. The lady had dropped her mask on the ground, and instead of, she picked it up and put it back right over her mouth and nose, off of the ground, off of the dirty ground that people were walking on. This just shows the insanity of people with these masks.
Yes, the intimidation and the fear of criticism, but let's keep working at it and look to the day when people do wake up. And when I see these studies and other people, changing their minds, it's never fast enough. But sometimes it cascades. It's slow starting, and then finally they give up. But I thought they would give up when it came to school year and when it came to football.
Yeah.
This whole thing, I think, is so disgusting that they can take something that not only is not harmful but probably beneficial to get people outdoors. And just expressing themselves or watching a football game and this sort of thing. I mean, they'll even regulate high school football games, I'm sure. They're not going to allow that to happen. So it's the authoritarians, and that's what we have in our title. The authoritarians won't give up, and that's what they seem to have been born for, to wield authority. But it's based on the assumption that people in general, as individuals, are incapable of dealing with their own lives and doing what is best for them. because some people don't do a very good job. But the answer to that is, why take somebody that's not doing a very good job and you get a Fauci in charge and ruins it for everybody else? You know, that's where the real problem is. Trusting government when it should be no trust at all. It should be that we should be watching government and checking on everything. The government, if they had any responsibility at all, it should be working very diligently to guarantee that individuals have their liberty to do what they want with their lives and to prohibit, you know, the aggression against each other. And I think the world would be a much better place, but few people hear. There's some people hear it, but few people act on it because there's always, I agree. But I need this and I need this, and we can't give up on the government help and assistance. And look, that's epidemic now. You know, government, they'll admit, you're right, Ron. This economy is messed up, and they're doing the wrong things here. But what about the government caused this? And that's why people don't have jobs and they don't have food, and they seem, so you have to help them. Yeah. So they grab the moral high ground, and you say, you know, boy, you're right, they caused it. But how in the world do they expect it to be corrected by doing more of what caused the problem? Yeah. And that's where we are today.
It's like treating an alcoholic with more alcohol, right?
They feel better.
Yeah, for a short time. I'm going to close out with one thing that you may want to comment on, Dr. Paul. But I want to remind our viewers, please subscribe to our channel. We're getting close to 250,000 subscribers, and that's going to be a big day for us. We're very happy. If you think you're subscribed, or if you think you've clicked the notifications, please double check, because I do look at the comments. Dr. Paul does too. A lot of people have said, hey, how am I unsubscribed? I subscribed to this. I hit notifications and I'm not getting them. So double check, make sure that you're subscribed and that you hit the notifications and help us grow. The last thing I'm going to talk about, Dr. Paul, is a really sad and a really sick story, and it has to do with Hawaii. And you know, my mother-in-law lives in Hawaii, and she is virtually under house arrest since March. And it's had a debilitating effect on her health, the health of everyone there, and it's an absolute disgusting gulag that they've turned that island into, those islands into. Look at this next clip. Forget about a Hawaii vacation until at least October, as COVID-19 spike delays tourism reopening. They're not even going to reopen it. If you go to Hawaii, you want to go on the beach, you want to have a little food, no, 14 days in quarantine in a hotel room. You can't get out of the room. They'll deliver you food. So that sounds like a great family vacation, right? Nope, they're going to keep it up because there's a spike in cases. So I said, let's look at deaths. So let's look at this next one. Here's deaths in Hawaii. Take a look at this chart. It must be dropping in the streets. No. Look at that. If you look at the legend on the left, that is a 1. That means 1 death. So there have been days and days and weeks with 0 death. The last single death they had was a couple of days ago. People are not dying in Hawaii from COVID-19. They're dying from being kept in house arrest, kept in prison, losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, and losing the joy of life.
Oh, that is a real tragedy. It has to be emotional too. You know, this whole idea of them making these false accusations, which is all we talk about, are they true or false? But you know, they say, well, that's just freedom of speech, and we have to protect freedom of speech, and it's part of that society that you want. But it really isn't. In a free society, you're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to cheat. You're not allowed to deceive people, because that's aggression. You know, you say, oh no, aggression is only when you take your fist and hit somebody in the face. Oh no, that's exempt these days because the police are endorsing it. They exempt you from that, but they participate in a bit of aggression by lying and provoking, you know, this fear mongering. So it's a misunderstanding of that you know, a free society would invite more of this, but it's also something that we have to be aware of and be able to sort it out and realize that the freer the society, the happier it is and the wealthier it is, and the biggest middle class occurs with a free society. These are facts that have been known, not for 100 years, even a lot longer than our country, even though we had a pretty good understanding of that after our revolution. But, you know, throughout all history, it's been well known, you know, thousands of years, that you shouldn't lie, cheat, steal, and kill. You know, this is something that if we would get more people to endorse this, because it's in their interest. It's not you're not I've never liked the argument about sacrificing, needlessly using this term, that especially when it comes to the military. Thank you for your sacrifice. Well, I was in for quite a few years, several years, and I don't want to be thanked for my sacrifice. I was drafted, and I wasn't very proud of what the military was doing in the 1960s. So it's you don't have to sacrifice. You never have to sacrifice liberty for security, because you end up, of course, we've been told, you end up with neither one. And this is why we have to sort this out. It's ideological, and on the side of liberty becomes the source of a productive society and a more peaceful society. That's why we have a little group called the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.